Covert video has exposed the cruel treatment of animals in some factory farms. But in several states, it's those who expose abusive practices that could end up being punished. Are the priorities of legislators too aligned with big business? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. Animal rights activists say new laws being enacted in several states are threatening their ability to uncover cases of appalling treatment of livestock. In many instances, videos such as this one, which shows the mistreatment of pigs at a farm in Wyoming, have resulted in the prosecution of some of those responsible. But in other states, it's the whistleblowers themselves who could now be pursued under legislation being proposed that would make it illegal to covertly videotape conditions at farms or to work undercover. Called AG-GAG bills by campaigners, the legislation is often based on a template drawn up by the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, a conservative group that brings together big business and politicians to formulate laws favorable to right-wing and corporate interests. ALEC had a hand in Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground gun law and voter ID regulations in various states. Activists say the legislation is part of a sustained campaign against animal and environmental activists led by corporations and the politicians they support. A few years ago, a senior FBI official named what he called eco-terrorism as the #1 domestic terror threat, a term that now appears to encompass non-violent civil disobedience by those simply concerned about the environment and cruelty to animals. Emily Meredith is the Director of Communications at the Animal Agriculture Alliance. She joins me now. Emily Meredith, why do you feel such legislation, as is being proposed around the country, is necessary?
Sure. Well, the farm protection legislation is really important because it protects the farm owners where these videos are shot. It protects the farm families who work those farms day in and day out, and it protects the animal agriculture industry as a whole. Of course, no one in the industry, none of these farm families condone any sort of animal abuse. But this farm protection legislation is really derived from a need for farm families to have a recourse against these activist groups who are really portraying them in a false light and using these videos as fundraising campaigns rather to really collaborate with the industry and make improvements.
But isn't it only farmers and farms that engage in abuse who should be worried about this sort of activity?
Well, there's of course bad apples in every industry, and there's people that don't always do the right thing. But these videos, as they are shown, contain false footage. They contain a false narrative. They're often images that are spliced together over many years. And so these videos not only are in the majority false, but they also are not emblematic of the industry as a whole. I mean, there's people, dozens, hundreds of companies that do the right thing every day in this industry. And those people are the people that are emblematic of these industries, not the videos that are shown that the activists try to make applicable to the industry as a whole.
How many specific examples are there of false videos being used?
Well, there's quite a few. I'm not going to provide you with specific examples because really, when these videos are released, the farm families and the owners of the farms where these videos are shot are devastated. And there's been a lot of instances where after videos are released, a few years ago even, there was a video that was released, and within minutes of the video being released direct to the media, there was an outcry on social media for people to engage in violence against the farm family, and to such an extent that the local police had to be posted outside the family's farm, and they had to take legal action. And so those types of things, these farm families are devastated by these videos. This is the first time a lot of them are hearing of these allegations, and they really are not eager to be thrust into the limelight once again. But there's many examples where these videos have been proven to be completely false.
I'm having some trouble finding those, though. I mean, again, is there anywhere where we can access those videos that were falsely manipulated and manufactured?
Well, again, I'll go back to there are no videos that pick apart the videos that have been aired, but the industry has collaborated to form an independent review panel, which includes animal behavior experts and animal scientists, including renowned expert Dr. Temple Grandin. And this panel together has gone into a lot of these farms and facilities where these videos have been shot and looked for legitimate abuse. And in most cases, the vast majority of the cases where they've reviewed the video and reviewed the farm's processing operations and their general operations, they found no legitimate instances of abuse. And I think it's interesting to note further that this review panel oftentimes asks the activist group for their full footage. A lot of times these activist groups are in facilities for weeks or months, and the activist groups have not once turned over their full footage. And I think if they did, you would find that the majority of their footage, if not all of the footage, is actually people doing the right thing.
Do you feel there's sufficient oversight of the treatment of animals in farms?
I do, and I think the last thing the industry needs is activist groups which really wish to see the end of animal production, the use of animals for human consumption. The industry doesn't need groups like that policing them. The industry has taken many proactive initiatives, from training employees in various languages, from putting video cameras in their operations and having a manager review those videos. We even have farms that have opened their doors to the public and have taken people on farm tours who have video cameras running all the time and have posted that video on the internet so that consumers can access that feed and see what's going on.
How many abuses have come to light using this self-policing model of oversight?
Well, I can't really speak to a specific number on that, but I think it's again important for me to reiterate that if the activists say that they have a 100% success rate, I think that's completely disingenuous. I think they define success as being able to post video and get donations, which they're very successful at because they post these videos under big donate now buttons. But they're not successful in terms of getting convictions or in terms of actually finding legitimate instances of abuse. What they are successful at is manipulating footage that shows standard industry practices and misleading consumers into thinking that their food is produced inhumanely or incorrectly.
I suppose part of the fear is there is a lack of transparency in modern farms. And there is a suspicion, perhaps partly because of the campaigns of these groups, that some farms are up to no good. Might the answer be to have more stringent legislation and regulatory oversight to ensure the consumer that best practices are being followed? Because right now, actually, there really isn't very much, let's face it.
Well, I would disagree with you there, and I think that the USDA and Food Safety Inspection Service and the FDA would disagree that there's not much oversight, as would local authorities. Every state has animal cruelty statutes in place to make sure that there is no abuse taking place. But I think that the industry has typically been very quiet. These are humble people. They just want to continue to do what they love, what they've been doing for generations, hundreds of years. A lot of these farms have been passed down. So they're humble and they're not communicating. But now they're recognizing that these consumers are hungry for knowledge, that they need to be talking more about all the good things they do. And it's, again, the vast majority of these people are doing the right thing. And it's these good farmers that don't deserve to be looking over their shoulder. And that's what farm protection legislation protects. They protect them.
And joining me in the studio to discuss this further are Wayne Pacelli, the President and CEO of the animal protection group, the Humane Society of the United States. And next to him, Will Potter, independent journalist and author of Green is the New Red, an insider's account of a social movement under siege. It might be useful at this point just to take a look in a bit more detail at some of the practices being uncovered which are leading to successful prosecutions. In particular, one that actually your group, the Humane Society, exposed in 2011, a video exposing workers using an illegal method of training for horses known as soaring. And a warning to our viewers, this video shows the abuse of horses. The workers at a training facility used chemicals to burn the legs of horses in order to force them to walk with a high step in competitions. The video also showed trainers striking horses on the head, among other abuses. And this video led federal prosecutors to charge and convict the perpetrators. Other videos, though, that have led to successful prosecutions. Just last week, one of 5 people accused of abusing turkeys on a North Carolina farm pled guilty to charges of animal cruelty. The animal rights group Mercy for Animals secretly filmed the farm workers kicking, beating and stomping on the turkeys. In a separate case, the same animal rights group released an undercover video of abuse by one of the largest egg suppliers in the country. That video showed workers burning off the beaks of young chicks, live chicks being suffocated in plastic bags, hens crammed into wire cages, and on other forms of cruelty. As a result, McDonald's and Target have dropped the egg supply. And we've got lots of other examples of that, most of which we're not going to show because it's just too disturbing. But let's run through the arguments against these sorts of videos, many of which it was alleged by those who support the industry don't lead to prosecution, actually. That actually, in fact, what is the record? I mean, how many of these videos that come to light do lead to successful prosecution, or are they simply wasting people's time in some ways, having been manipulated?
Well, of those conducted by the Humane Society of the United States, which again don't involve disruption of the operation, simply recording what's occurring and then presenting it to the public or presenting it to authorities, our Wyoming Premium Farms investigation led to 9 arrests. Our Hallmark investigation, which showed the abuse of downer cows too sick or injured to walk, not only led to prosecutions but to the largest meat recall in American history. A number of other investigations, like the one at this horse farm in Tennessee, exposing this barbaric practice of injuring the feet of horses to exaggerate their natural gait in order to win ribbons at horse shows, did lead to a federal prosecution. So what's stunning to me, Shihab, is that time after time we're actually finding terrible stuff that the public, prosecutors, and others are very interested in.
All right, but we heard the argument a moment ago. These are some bad apples, Will Potter, and that there are plenty of other examples where video has been found to have been selectively edited in order to create a bad impression. And frankly, anyway, say when we're talking about battery farming and chickens, it's very easy to focus on a few dead chickens or sick chickens. It's inevitable when you've got hundreds of thousands of chickens. So there's a lot of selective editing going on, which is what part of the problem.
Well, there's a difference between saying that a video has been edited to condense it to a few minutes to present on YouTube or on the ABC Nightly News. It's a different thing entirely to allege that these videos have been doctored, manipulated, or manufactured, which is what the industry seems to be saying right now. There's no evidence of this. And if there is evidence, I'm sure prosecutors would love to see it as well, because as Wayne was saying, this has led to criminal prosecutions in multiple states. This isn't on evidence from 20 years ago. This is from a few months ago. These are current practices. And so I think it's important, as we're talking about criminal activity, though, to not get too focused on that, because much of what happens on these farms is completely 100% legal. And that's what has the industry scared as well. I mean, these are standard industry practices.
But that's another example that the industry uses for not having these videos. The example I've often read is, look, I mean, you could show someone open heart surgery, and it can seem barbaric, but the fact is everything is being done for the best of intentions and with best practice.
Yeah, well, we're very disassociated from our food supply, and one of the things that we're trying to do within the animal welfare movement is to connect people to their food and to really say, okay, this is happening in some rural outpost, whether it's the production or the slaughter, but you have a moral duty to see what's going on with these animals. And as agriculture has changed and it's become so industrialized, these living, feeling creatures are jammed into cages and crates barely larger than their bodies. They are sometimes skinned alive before you know they are killed and made into meat. These are really weighty moral matters that every one of us should be thinking about. All of us are consuming food products.
Right, but that argument then leads to the charge that this isn't really about animal cruelty. This is about abolishing meat eating.
No, it's really about taking a look at practices that are unacceptable for a range of reasons. I mean, if you're talking about abusing downer cows, that's a food safety issue as well as an animal welfare issue. If you're talking about confining a sow in a crate where the animal cannot turn around, whether you're an inveterate carnivore or you're a vegan, that should concern every one of us. I mean, what we've done at the Humane Society is not say everyone should go vegetarian, but that there should be basic standards of decency exhibited to animals raised for food, perhaps precisely because they're raised for food.
What about the privacy of family farms being violated? That's another argument that we've been hearing as well, Will.
You know, the industry has often made this analogy to comparing these factory farms to your own home. But the big difference is that people are not going to the supermarket and purchasing items that were raised in your backyard. I mean, these are industrial operations that receive massive government subsidies that have dramatic impacts on the environment, on our health, and that we all have contact with to some extent every single day. I mean, these are consequences for us as consumers, for workers, and of course for the animals and the environment.
But how much oversight is there currently?
Well, and I think that's a great point. I mean, the ag lobby, the agribusiness lobby, fights even the most modest reforms. There are no federal standards of care for animals on farms. The only time you have a criminal situation is if the mistreatment of the animals gets so malicious or becomes torture that it violates a state anti-cruelty statute. In fact, most of the states have provisions in their anti-cruelty statutes to exempt customary and routine animal husbandry practices. So that exempts the battery cages, the gestation crates, the veal crates, tail docking of dairy cows, where they're cutting off the tail of the cows for no reason and for which there's no scientific justification for that mutilation procedure.
But how often then do federal or local authorities conduct the sort of surveillance of these farms that we're seeing through the work of animal rights groups?
I think people would be really shocked to know that there's not a single law that governs farm animals during their lives. And on top of that, the minimal legislation that exists about animals at the point of slaughter exempts poultry, which are about 95% of animals killed. So although there might be USDA inspectors at certain sites, what we've seen through Humane Society, Mercy for Animals, and Compassion Over Killing investigations, that some of these facilities are in fact USDA suppliers. They have USDA inspectors there, and they've been praised by the USDA, and we're still seeing these egregious animal welfare abuses.
They're deregulated. I mean, the ag lobby in this town of Washington, D.C. is so powerful that they're able to thwart the most minimal reforms. The Federal Animal Welfare Act, the main statute protecting animals, exempts farm animals entirely. So the industry makes it sound like they've got everything just neatly packaged and tied up when they've been fighting the most minimal reforms, and now they want to close the curtain around these factory farms so the public can't even see what's going on.
All right, but one last point before we move on to the actual legislation that's being proposed. What about the charge that what oversight there is? These animal review panels aren't even being cooperated with by animal rights groups, who aren't even supplying the footage, all of the footage that they take. And actually, when this footage is reviewed by these panels, for example, by Professor Temple Grandin, who was just mentioned, they're found to be nonsense.
Well, Professor Temple Grandin has actually reviewed a number of the investigations that we've conducted, expressed her utter shock at the abuse, said that the individual should be prosecuted. She's also publicly said that these AG-GAG laws that try to forbid people from taking pictures of animals or to turn over evidence within 24 hours are wrong-headed and counterproductive for the agriculture industry. So here she is, a meat industry scientist, saying that this is tactically a very, very dumb maneuver by the industry to shut off public discussion and visual images. She says, open them up. If you are doing a good job as a farmer, you should not be embarrassed and you're not vulnerable.
All right, well, let's get on to the AG-GAG laws, many of which seem to have been based on model legislation that was drawn up by the American Legislative Exchange Council, which we've done shows on before. They're on the internet. But basically, that's a collaborative resource for corporations and politicians to have the toolbox to draft legislation, I suppose, on a number of issues of shared concern, I guess. And the language in the model legislation that has led to these AG-GAG bills is very similar to the ALEC model bills, specifically the Animal and Ecological Terrorism Act, which was first drafted in 2003. It classifies basically non-violent civil disobedience by environmental and animal rights activists as terrorism. It prohibits filming or taking pictures at farms or research facilities that defame the facility or its owner. And bills using that sort of language have been passed now in Iowa, Missouri, Tennessee, and Utah. There has been resistance, though, as well. Similar bills were not enacted in New Mexico, New Hampshire, and Wyoming. And states currently considering such legislation are Arkansas, California, Indiana, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Vermont. What is the role of ALEC, would you say, in the drafting of this?
Well, these attempts to crack down on undercover investigators have been around really since the 1980s, but they took on new life with ALEC in about 2003 by creating this model legislation that then could be tailored and introduced around the country without any fingerprints connecting the bill to ALEC and its corporate sponsors.
So how do we know then?
How do we know?
Yeah, that ALEC is responsible for this? Is it really circumstantial then?
No, it's not. I mean, one example is the specific language. In many cases, I've gone through and it's cut and pasted from this model legislation, word for word, clause for clause. I mean, think it's a stretch to see that as accidental. We've also seen ALEC's influence on display in terms of mobilizing its members to vote for this legislation. As part of my work, I went through and just tabulated the votes on every single one of these ag bills, and you can see by looking at known ALEC members, for instance in Utah, half of the yay votes in the Senate were from ALEC members. So it's a secretive organization, which I think should bring a lot of questions in and of itself. But even through that, we can see the influence of ALEC.
And people can sort of choose, I guess. I mean, this is the bill, and it's 4 pages long, and there are lots of different paragraphs, and people seem to be picking and choosing which bits they want. So, for example, in Indiana, are they the only ones? I think they've introduced legislation that takes the full paragraph, section 2D, which extends this not just to agricultural industries, but also construction, mining, forest, harvesting, gathering, and processing natural resources. So that has even further implications. That was in their initial suggestion, I suppose, but not all states necessarily go for that.
Exactly. And even North Carolina just reintroduced one of these bills, and it's so broad that it targets all of manufacturing as well. So this has implications for instance, environmental activists that are protesting fracking, the logging of old-growth forests, undercover investigators exposing factory farms, union workers exposing unfair working conditions. I mean, this affects everyone.
In any industry, basically.
Anyone whatsoever.
And in Section 5 of the model legislation, though, they suggest a terrorist registry. Have states gone for that, or is that something even too far for most people?
The important thing to remember about ALEC is it's really a wish list of everything they want to see. To my knowledge, no state has passed this full bill in its entirety. But one state, like for instance in Washington, they included this model language about environmentalists as well. So it can really pick and choose based on the circumstances.
I mean, what's notable then is the use of the word terrorism. And that it ties in with a notion that appears to have become increasingly prevalent over the last few decades of eco-terrorism being the #1 domestic terror threat. I mean, it's very difficult. They don't actually necessarily they're not searchable lists from the FBI, I suppose, but certainly some FBI officials have said that in the past. What are the origins of that framing of eco-terrorism, and is there a problem?
Well, that really began in the early 1980s as these movements were growing very quickly and very boldly. And the industry responded immediately by trying to shift the nature of the public dialogue. So they actually invented this term, eco-terrorism. And over the next 20 some odd years, they used it relentlessly in public relations campaigns, congressional hearings, sound bites, newspaper advertisements, until it started to inject itself into the public dialogue. And then over time, like you said, it really rose to this level of the #1 domestic terrorism threat.
Do we know if that's still the case, or again, we don't?
As recently of about a year ago, the FBI was still using this rhetoric. And whether or not the FBI is using that rhetoric in its press releases, we're seeing that mentality play out at the state level, I think, with these AG-GAG bills.
In fact, there was in 2011, Pennsylvania Homeland Security was found to have been including anti-BP vigils, screenings of the film Gasland about fracking, which actually we did a show on once, a gay and lesbian festival, in their terrorist activity bulletin, which they send out to different forces.
Well, and this is, what you heard from the Animal Agriculture Alliance person was, these tapes are being doctored, as if we're engaging in propaganda when all of the footage that's been disseminated is authentic. No one has challenged any particular piece of it. But who are the real propagandists here? Lazily throwing out these terms or intentionally throwing out these terms like terrorism to simply talk about documenting what goes on the farms. I mean, the Humane Society of the United States, which has 11 million people on its mailing list, 1 of every 28 Americans, works through legal channels. I mean,
Wayne, are you a terrorist? I suppose is the question.
The only thing that we're hostile toward are forms of animal abuse and animal cruelty, but we believe that good-thinking people are going to make the right decisions, which is why you present information and let people come to their own conclusions, which is what they fear.
But isn't there a problem, Will Porter, with, I think the Animal Liberation Front and the Earth Liberation Front are often cited as potential physical threats, arsonists and so forth, who have taken direct action. Isn't there a hard core?
Sure, that's existed for many years. But I think it's really important to emphasize that all social movements have these legal and illegal elements, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. But what's interesting about the animal rights movement is that it has never extended to physical violence against human beings, ever. So no matter how you feel about even the most radical tactics like property destruction, it's never harmed people. And that's not something that can be said of, for instance, right-wing groups, which the West Point study recently released indicates are on the rise in this country.
So, and this has led, though, very quickly, because we've only got a minute left, to special prisoners and prisons for those who are convicted of these sorts of eco-terrorist crimes. They're put into communications management units. We've only got like 30 seconds. We're going to do a show about this soon, I'm sure. But as the name suggests, this is specifically to stop people from talking, I guess. Political prisoners in some ways.
And this really reflects the institutionalizing of these corporate ideologies and rhetoric. I mean, we're at the point where people are being singled out because of their inspirational significance, according to the government language, and their politics for special prison units. And that should really disturb everyone.
Will Potter, thank you very much. Wayne Du Selig, thank you very much as well.
Thank you.
And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.